All right, in our fifth video on this last installment on the Lord's Supper, as we again reflect on who is worthy to receive the Lord's Supper, we want to think about baptism. Just like in baptism, the Lord's Supper expresses a unity of fellow believers together into the family of God. Unity is always based on following Jesus, who he is, what he's done, and all that he taught, which reflects him and his will. Understanding this, explain why the church also asks that those who attend the Lord's Supper believe the same about Jesus and his teaching. We call this close communion, or some might say closed communion. Not everyone can come forward. Although we want everyone to be able to join us at the table, we recognize they need to be instructed. They need to understand what it is they're receiving. They need to recognize Christ's body and blood. They need to be repentant, sorrowful over their sin, seeing their need for forgiveness. They need to believe and be in unity about all that Jesus taught, because we come together united. God wants us to be united. And if there are differences, those should be worked out first, or there should be an agreement of working those things out before we join at the table as if we're one. So, understanding this, explain why the church also asks that those who attend the Lord's Supper believe the same about Jesus and his teaching. Explain what terrible things would happen to the gift of the Lord's Supper and all of Jesus' teaching if we did not recognize unity with others based on Jesus' teaching. I mean, what are the difficulties that would come up if everybody and anyone can just come to the table? And is that really loving? Oh, it's easy to say, oh yeah, come up. Everyone come up. But the loving thing is, right, to actually care for a soul. And if a soul is going to sin when they come up, that's not loving at all. So talk about that question. Why is it important to believe the same about Jesus' teaching? To understand that Christ's body and blood's there for our forgiveness, and to be repentant. Why is that important? What negative things would happen if we didn't hold to such a view in practice? So you think about those things. Let me read to you a couple passages. Because there is one loaf, the Apostle Paul says, one loaf in the distribution of Holy Communion. So there's just one loaf. It's the flat bread, the matzah bread, unleavened bread. Since there's one loaf, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one loaf. We who partake of that one loaf, as it's divided up into wafers, we recognize, we're to be one also, even as we're individual people. We're to be one in teaching and in practice. How about this? 2 Thessalonians 3:14. Paul says this about some that were not believing. One aspect about end times and the end of the world that Paul was teaching. Paul says, look, if anyone does not obey our instruction in this letter that he wrote, 2 Thessalonians, a very short letter, only a few chapters. He says, if anyone who doesn't agree with us, take special note of them. Do not associate with them. It's in this religious context, in order that he may feel ashamed. Yeah, do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. So keep distant until they recognize the error, bring him into the truth, and as you do so, don't treat him as an enemy. Let them know that they're your brother, but there's something wrong, something's amiss, and it needs to be worked out. All right, so again, can you rightfully explain why we practice close communion? Or closed communion? Why we don't just allow anyone to come forward for the Lord's Supper? All right, I'll leave that to your discussion. We will follow up on our last video next time.